That's nice.
It's a big face you got there, Kevin.
Before we get started, just want to say thank you for having us here. This is, I think, the 6th or 7th year that I've been to the summit, and exactly as David says, it's amazing change over time. Things are looking fantastic. It's wonderful to see all the new faces and all the people that I do know and love out there. It's great. Also wanted to give a really quick shout out to my brother Chris, who designed the logo, which I think is awesome, just because he's cool. And wanted to say one other thing about the summit, which is if you could fill out feedback forms on the sessions that you went to, if you haven't already, that would be fantastic. Finally, let's get into this. Randy and I are super excited to be here. We're both very snarky fellows, and hopefully we won't offend anyone other than ourselves with our comments up here today.
We do apologize in advance if that actually does happen, but bear with us.
We got a lot of good questions from folks out there, so we're going to try to address those. We're going to start off, though, by introducing each other, because I'm sure there are many of you who don't know who we are and why the heck we're up here. So we'll do that, and then we have a few questions that we've just been dying to ask each other since we last worked with each other. And then we've got some questions from you guys, and then hopefully, if we have time, we'll have some Q&A. I don't know if there's a time limit anymore. It'd be cool to see if there was.
Great.
So.
Great.
Yeah.
Let's we'll go ahead and get started. I am going to introduce Kevin, who's a good friend of mine. He is a hero of mine in some sorts. We've worked together for many, 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 many years. But here's a few interesting bullets for those of you who don't know Kevin very well. He was one of the first folks to do usability in games in the modern era on a title called NetWits for the MSN online service in 1996, and on MS PC games such as Combat Flight Sim and Age of Empires shortly thereafter. He was one of the founders of what is now known as Microsoft Studios User Research, as well as the group manager. Kevin has a pretty unique experience that spans across not only Microsoft, but also Zynga and now Sony, which is pretty awesome. According to Moby Games, he's credited in over 30 games, notably the sadly extinct Xbox Sports Network titles, Gears of War, Mass Effect, and soon to be Uncharted 4. There's Kevin.
Thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Randy, actually I was involved in bringing Randy to Microsoft in 2000, where he was one of the first games user researchers that we had join that first wave. He was brought on to help out with the upcoming Xbox release. So at that point we had to figure out how to test and release 70-some games. Randy had, I believe, 7 different games that he was responsible for in that time, and he was right out of a different job that was not games related at all. So he was learning to do games user research and taking on 7 different products, as were all the other folks there, but doing all that with a great deal of grace and fairly amazing. He also co-authored the first academic chapter that we know has come out. It's used widely across universities worldwide. Randy was featured in a cover story of Wired in 2007 for his and his team's involvement with Bungie on Halo 3. In addition to that, he was interviewed on NPR for the same purpose. He's been featured in OXM magazine with a focus recently on the 2014 version of Studio's user research team. Randy took over as group manager at Microsoft Game Studios in 2008, and he now leads an international team of nearly 60 staff comprised of researchers, lab staff, developers, and PMs. So Randy,
Yes.
those early years when you came on and you were thrown into the fire, as it were, I've always kind of wondered exactly how that was for you. How did you handle that?
Yeah, I hated it right out of the gate. You come aboard and, Ramon Romero's here, and you've heard names like Bill Fulton, Michael Medlock. Kevin, what really it was a bunch of folks from University of Washington who happened to be working at Microsoft that hung out a lot. That got the opportunity to kind of redefine the way you do user testing at Microsoft for the games division. But they were all PC players. And I think one of the only reasons they hired me was because I played console games, which did not change the fact that
I was the only other one.
Yes.
I needed some help.
I was there to help you, but you did not help me when every day at 5 o'clock we would go into our playtest labs at the time for at least an hour and play some hardcore games like Rogue Spear, Unreal Tournament, Counter-Strike, games
set up for playtesting. Before every playtest, we would play like an hour and a half of Unreal Tournament or something else.
I'd never touched a PC game other than SimCity at the time, and so it was pretty tough. I got yelled at quite a bit by my peers and was told I was only allowed to use Heartbeat and was not allowed to actually carry any weapons.
Don't stand still.
For anyone, yeah. But it was a fun time. I mean, it was early days for a lot of this work. It was like a startup feel. But with a corporate backing, which was pretty exciting at the time. And then there was a very unique a brand of rigor that I really haven't seen before in the little industry experience that I had that was carrying over, I think, from a lot of the basics of the academic work that you guys were doing at the time.
How did you go from that chaotic beginning to group manager at that time, certainly the leading and biggest usability group?
I've talked to you guys about this before, and we're all family here. So part of it was driven by revenge to be in charge of the team instead of reporting to. But I think on a more serious note, I think one of the big things that I learned pretty early on during that phase was kind of changing who our customer was. In the early days, I think the big unique contribution that we felt like we were making was creating a user research approach that really focused on design intent. And in the games world, design intent can be the most bizarre, insane thing that you can possibly think of. I think there was a time at which we kind of shifted, kind of looked at a different customer, and it wasn't design anymore. And we'll talk a little bit more about this in terms of UX maturity, but suffice it to say, I think a lot of the, my learning and my kind of development up through the ranks was based on changing kind of who we were doing user research for. I'm going to turn this around on Kevin and make him answer a couple of questions as well. We talked a little bit about where I came from. Kevin was an old timer when I started in 2000, so he brings a lot to the table. He's been in the business for many, many decades. We look at the games world now. You've been 2 decades now, playing a lot of different roles in games, from user researcher to designer, manager to group manager. What's been your favorite role and why? And how old are you?
What's
Really?
I refuse to answer that last question.
Okay, that's fine.
But I'm proud of my time as a group manager. I thought that I had a lot of challenges then. The group was really a part of the larger Microsoft usability group at the time that I took over as manager, and I was able to move it to being really a part of the games organization. And with that came a lot of challenges trying to figure out how to relate to executives in that organization, how to show what the business utility of this was, why they should fund our group and manage our group. So that was really, I'm proud of that work, that was good. But yet I decided to switch into design right after that because I really wanted to be more a part of the specific game development process, and I really like design.
Kevin was a wannabe designer, but
a wannabe. Yeah, but the actual fact is I think I'm best at the user researcher role, and so that's what I've been doing since then pretty much is in principal user research roles.
Well, there's an interesting thing around, as we all know, being researchers, we actually don't deliver anything that's required per se like a designer would in terms of the influence on crafting the game experience. We deliver insights or recommendations or problems, whereas a designer is the person that's actually in there making stuff.
Yeah. Have you made any cool stuff?
I have not made any cool stuff. But my question for you, as from the researcher side of the house, is there anything interesting, any kind of influence that you had that may have a little bit of a design flair to it that people would be interested in knowing about?
Any like my bizarre influences?
Sure. Yeah.
I think that I'm basically responsible for the how to fix your bumper videos on the internet on YouTube. The bumper being the Xbox 360 button on top, and Xbox One also. So it was a good enough idea to get there. Not that I made those videos, but that I named the bumper. So I'm kind of proud of that one. That's bizarre.
That's fantastic.
Right? Thank you.
You're welcome.
How about you? Anything crazy named?
I got a UI design credit once, lead credit.
Nice.
But there was an interesting thing. So in the earlier days of studios, in the early part of Xbox Live, you often would look to the first-party studios to kind of influence and drive some of the features that they were building from the platform level. And there was a small little thread I was on for Halo 2. We were trying to figure out, what should we call this system where we bring people together and actually play multiplayer games, and they wanted to call it squads at the time. And I think my contribution to the world when I'm dead and gone will be, I said, well, what about parties? Let's call it parties. And they took it and they ran with it. And I think some weird influence there of...
you didn't want to call it squads because of brute force.
That is correct. But I think parties was also just kind of a more welcoming
Anyone remembers
thing.
that game? No. Okay.
No. So let's move on.
I like it. Parties.
Thank you.
Let's switch and get into some of the questions that we have from the group. Do you want me to start? Do you want to start?
I'll take a crack at it. There was a good question from Amelie. I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name. About the relationship between the big studios and the game studios. What does it look like when studios have their own UX research team?
Right. So let me break this into two questions, actually, a little bit. I'd like to talk a little bit about our organizations, because I think there's some slightly different approaches that Microsoft and PlayStation takes, and this is PlayStation Hearts Xbox. Anyway, the PlayStation GUR organization is actually 4 separate geographical organizations. There's Tokyo team that's led by Shinya Nakamura, and a London team led by Mark Green, and a San Diego team now led by Ramon Romero, who we worked with. It was great also. And then Nana Wallace leads the San Mateo team. And each one of those organizations is really responsible for the games from their part of the world. And the result of that is that we have a fairly separate cultures and processes and specialties in each of those places, and we can work together. So organizationally speaking, we're pretty decentralized, I guess.
Yeah, which is a little different than, for those who are familiar with the way the Microsoft Studios user research is set up, is where we are very centralized, which is different than the embedded language that we heard a little bit earlier in the day. We do more dotted line types of things, but we are a central team supporting kind of outwards all the studios that we work with.
Right.
But what is that relationship then? What is the relationship from kind of whether it's a studio that already has UR in it compared to flagship kinds of UR roles at a publisher?
Right. Generally speaking, we don't have that many developers that have their own UX staff inside their studios. So what we're doing is we're really forming relationships with the teams directly in most of those cases. And sometimes there's a great deal of relationship forming between the producers who may be holding some of those roles in the past. And that's one of the chief ways that that expresses in Sony. I know that there's been a couple of cases though at Microsoft where had some
with the industry kind of getting more and more mature, you're seeing a lot of the individual studios that are hiring in staff, and so you don't have to rely on the publishers to have it. But in the cases where they do, I think for us the way we look at it is really understanding that there needs to be a seat at the table from the UR perspective. It doesn't matter if it comes from the publisher or in-house, but not really looking at that other person as a threat, but really as a partner, and then complementing. Because to be honest, there's going to be capabilities that a smaller studio user researcher is going to have in terms of the intimacy with the product or other types of methods that they do that speaks better to the product owners compared to maybe some of the capabilities that come at a publisher level. And we've done this recently in Rise of the Tomb Raider, working really well with Yannis' team, with Square Enix, partnering really well there. So it's well.
A slightly different case there, but I think to the same point is there are a number of cases where we do joint projects, or we assist with projects across the regions at PlayStation. So, for example, we've been working with the London studio on the Guerrilla title, and with the Japanese studio on Bloodborne. And in doing that, I think that what we've really wanted to focus on is developing a common perspective and a shared testing plan across that. And I think that the same kind of approach would probably do well if you're connecting with a UX person within a studio.
Yeah, I mean, I think the most pragmatic thing really is just don't contradict one another.
Right.
I mean, that's really what it comes to at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Going to get to another question, because I'm looking at the time to make sure we get through most of these. From Jonathan Dankoff, Kevin, what do you miss most from Microsoft besides me, and what were you happy to leave behind and do differently?
I do actually miss the team the most, because they were my team once, and so many friends and so on. That's a huge part of what I miss. But I also end up missing the fact that Microsoft is so good at making software. Some may give a funny look when I say that, but Microsoft is first and foremost a software company, and they have amazing processes at building software and games. What we've always worked on are the game side. Software processes are super important. And PlayStation, it's probably not their strength. PlayStation is a hardware and an entertainment company. Sony is a hardware company. PlayStation is a hardware and entertainment company. And it's a blessing and a curse, to be honest. The differences in processes between the development of software and developing those other things it leads me really to miss the QA department a lot, and to miss all kinds of things that are really pretty spectacular.
I never thought I would hear Kevin say that he missed the QA department at Microsoft. But he did.
But that said, I really appreciate the other aspects coming to PlayStation. I mean, one of the things that I love the most about being with an entertainment company is that they really care about narrative. And I don't mean to offend too much, but at least back when I was there was, I remember being in a number of arguments, even within the user research group, about the value of story in games. And, I'm old, this was a while ago, this was a long time ago. We've had lots of good conversations here during the day about narrative, so obviously it's got a much higher profile, but
we fired all those people, by the way. So let's move on to a new question, because story is very important.
All right.
Go ahead. Why don't you take another crack at one of the questions?
I'm interested in Morgane Schreiber's question about what are the biggest challenges that you face communicating to stakeholders, to developers, executives? What are the communication challenges?
It's interesting. It depends on kind of the level of this question based on where a given person is coming from. But I think the most generic thing that I could say in terms of communication challenges is a lack of understanding that your partner is not an idiot. And for the most part, they're coming, In the same way that when I was watching Pierre talk about biometrics, and he made a very clear point about the craft and the discipline and having to simplify it to your customer, the thing that we as researchers, I think, haven't really evolved to yet is recognizing that our partners are doing the same thing to us. But they're coming to the table through a business lens, through a product development lens, through an executive lens, that we don't speak their language. So a lot of times I'll see, researchers, myself included, just make incorrect assumptions around and not having empathy for where the partner is coming from, and just getting down to the essence of really what it is that they're trying to ask. The other side of I think the question around communicating to stakeholders, I was talking with Kevin about this a little earlier, it's a little ironic, is the challenges that you have within your own user research team when you're trying to communicate to different sets of stakeholders, but it looks like you're selling out the purity of the research that you're doing. Again, there's a lot, we've gone through our own types of evolution of really understanding what it is that we do for our design partners, what it is and how we gain that trust, and then treating the management, studio managers and producers in the same way, and it looking like we're selling out to upper management. And that's a whole other kind of learning, I think, and challenge that many of us still have to figure out.
Getting everyone on the same page and feeling happy about it. I mean, face it, a lot of us come from an academic background, and there's a different way of approaching research there, and a huge part of my experience in games has been learning the business side, and learning how to speak business language and talk about UX in a way that makes sense to people who are trying to sell product.
Well, I mean, building on that thread, right? The question again from Morgan, asking about the place of UR within the organization. How much of our role is convincing studios to even use us? Can you kind of build on the thread you have around learning how to speak business and what that means for UR? So
that was my chief challenge really when I was group manager, and before that really, because the time leading up to group manager, which was 2003-ish or so, was all about trying to demonstrate, here's what usability is. Here's why this thing that is very relevant to the rest of the company is also relevant to games and to entertainment experiences. And the first thing there really was talking about games in terms of challenge, and talking about games in terms of not always trying to have the easiest possible outcome. I remember Bill Fulton ranting on this all the time, and he's right, really. But basically, it took me years and years to develop any kind of skill, talking up to the executives, talking in a business language, really, about what our value was. And but by contrast, my boss in San Mateo, Nana Wallace, is like, she's so smooth as she's great at this, phenomenal. I mean, within the first week when I started there, she had introduced me to the heads of all of the major studios, and not just said, this is Kevin, but this is Kevin, and this is how he's going to help our business, and this is why this is a valuable change to make. And
well, that leads into one of the questions that our friend David Tisserand, everybody's friend David Tisserand, asked us around kind of comparison of UX maturity, right? Which is a very similar question to Morgan's around the place of UR within the organization. And the way I think about it is kind of three-tiered, if you will. The first one, and we've all, I think, have gone through this or have been at a particular phase of this, is kind of that delight phase where you're partnering with the business and they're very excited about what you can do. They're very thankful about what you can do. They're very appreciative about all of those things and those reports that you've done to help make a better game. But that really is...
This is kind of the I never knew phase.
Yes, it's I never knew you existed phase. But
that's cool.
That, of course, isn't good enough. You have to get to a point where they're not appreciative and then they're expecting, right? Where you become, the process is dependent on you. You are accountable, and they don't appreciate you anymore.
Yeah.
They take you for granted, but that means you're at a different phase of your maturity. It means you're expected, just like a very, a nice pair of scissors, it just works.
Right.
Like you don't say, wow, I didn't know I could cut this cleanly or with these cool designs. So getting your organization or your service to be at the point where you're actually not appreciated anymore, you're just expected, right? I think that's where you need to be. And then...
Yeah, I mean, and I think that, thankfully both of our organizations are at that place right now. So in some ways, the other answer to the question is, well, then what do you do? And really, it's all about, it's the same answer, which is trying to make it clear that you have a plan to develop the highest possible quality in the product with the least possible disruption or use of resources and so on in the dev cycle.
I think there's even another, you can be even stronger with that as opposed to kind of being, how do you optimize the cost, because it's all a business. And it really is when the business looks at you as a competitive advantage, when the business starts talking about you as not just part of the process, but we need to have this in order to maximize our chance of breaking through, right? It's a different kind of conversation where they go back to, not only do they appreciate you now, they want you there, they want to have your service as a seat at the table. And that's something that I think at different levels we're still dealing with. I mean, a lot of our partners will say we're special sauce or that we're critical and that they need us. But there's a lot more growth there that we can do, for sure.
So, this kind of folds right into one of the other questions from David, again, actually about whether or not GUR is a variable that's considered at milestones or stage gates.
It should be. Here's my
so I'm going to let Randy
statement.
Answer this one. In San Mateo, we don't have a process around this. So I'd like to hear more about how Microsoft is approaching this now.
Well, I think it's, I'll step aside from the Microsoft specifically, the mechanics around it, and talk more about it from a generic level. Is when you have a function that is contributing to any real kind of business decision that you're going to make. And I don't care if it's marketing and how people feel about marketing or dev or production, that they're there because the decision makers feel like there's something valuable that they need to contribute and take into account when making a hard call, which does include everything from greenlighting a title to sunsetting a title to signing or whatever it may be. Why on earth we as a discipline wouldn't want to have the same type of presence at that table, the same type of contribution for consideration is beyond me, even though I know it's not that cut and dry. Of course.
Well, the flip side, the
question
that people have asked is, how do you maintain the trust of the developers in a situation in which you're part of the evaluation process? And you could be responsible, or at least partially responsible, for that project not going forward. Now they are in a position where they may want to game you. And you don't want that relationship. So how do you manage that?
Yeah, I think for us, it always has started first with the developers, with the partners, with the designers, and gaining that trust. And then we try and build in a framework or a structure where the IC or lead who may be, keeping the trust within the studio can just blame it on the management, right, for any type of reporting that needs to happen centrally or at gates or milestones or things like that. So we do try and separate it, the formative types of research where we're part of the team, we're trying to iterate and do the best designs possible, but we are also not, we don't lie. There is a business that's being run, and it's better to tell the team, would you rather have us representing the true state of what's going on to them, or them make assumptions about it? Because in the absence of us being there, I don't think you want to have them just making stuff up, even if it is at the risk, right? No surprises. We would never surprise a partner by exposing a certain metric or a certain report up through at a gate meeting or anything like that. But it's better to head it off right in the outset. So there's an expectation that's set, and just remind them we're all here for the same reason,
right,
to make the best game possible. We're not here to kill you. Why would we? That's not why we're
trust
here.
And I think it goes a long way to be able to have really good conversations about what the testing plan is, and what you're going to approach, how you're going to approach the entire cycle. And if everyone's up on board with that, then there's no surprises, really. Yeah. Is what it comes down to.
Yeah, I mean, you just have to make them part of the process as well. And you can be kind of the translation layer to allay some of the fear of what the execs may see.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, switching gears. Okay.
We got 10 minutes left.
One more question from LinkedIn.
Okay.
I think we can answer it pretty quickly because I frankly don't have much to say on it.
Okay.
What new challenges does VR present for our user researchers? This is from Ben Weber, and it's a good question. I just don't actually do a lot of work on VR, so I only have one thing. I'm going to squeeze in my comment. I shouldn't be asking myself, but
Squeeze it in, Kevin.
Yeah, my thought on this is actually from Microsoft days. I have been involved in hardware creation that is in fact from the Kinect all the way back to the original gamepads for the Xbox and stuff. And I don't know if you remember the name of the first controller for the Xbox.
The Duke. I do remember.
So named because it was as big as Randy's head.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yeah, I believe so. Bastard.
It was large. Your head is not that large.
Yeah, thank you.
It's just fine. Very nice. Anyway, so the problem with that was not any of those things. The concern with the testing there was that the testing wasn't done on the games that it was going to be for. Yeah. And so that would be like my first immediate thing would be don't test VR without the games that you're going to want to use it with. It's hugely important to be testing it in the actual context.
I'll take a more obnoxious academic stab at this question, and I'm sad that I missed the VR roundtable. But I think the problem that I see based on VR is just the simple fact that we are screwing with people when it comes to VR. You're basically severing kind of the visual perception system from what we're used to in terms of gravito-inertial forces, and I just
I was trying to liken this to the I guess in the mid to late 1800s.
You were there, I know. That's right.
I was hanging around, and they got this new thing called trains.
Right. Sure.
And when the trains move at the same time, there's some weird phenomenon that were identified by psychologists. One of the first some of the first social psychology studies were about these visual phenomenon, and it has an effect that you couldn't remember the name of it.
I couldn't
either.
But
anyway, it's similar to that. There was a fair amount of nausea created, and it actually spawned social psychology in some fashions.
I think we're looking at something similar. It's
really?
Just yeah. But let's get to audience questions since we are less than 10 minutes. Do we have our mic runners, our awesome runners of the mic? If people have questions, they're right there. Let's do it. Not Joyce. Let's choose. No, I'm just.
So you guys have both been in the industry for just about forever.
Thank you.
How do you keep the love alive? Like, what keeps you interested?
How do you keep the love alive? Kevin just keeps popping companies. No. Go ahead. I'll answer after you.
I'm obsessed with games. Actually, it's all about the games for me. I love them. I get a huge thrill out of making games as good as they can be, and so I don't want to say this too loudly, but I enjoy doing it at Zynga. I definitely enjoy doing it at Microsoft. I enjoy doing it at PlayStation. There's no problem for me moving from one game to another and continuing to enjoy doing it. Super easy.
For me, I'm a researcher at heart, even though I've been in the SHIT umbrella role for many years now. The way I think I keep kind of the love there is understanding that we're still part of something very interesting and disruptive when it comes to kind of the game's contribution to broader HCI, to broader types of just interactive technologies and whatnot. I mean, what got me excited from the very beginning was we're going to invent something new, and naively, we're going to take over the world, whatever that means. But now that we've been around and you see the evidence, right, and the inertia, and I come to these events for that reason particularly. It reminds me that we're still, although we're doing really well, we're still in our infancy, and there's a long ways to go. And once the rest of the world recognizes that it's not just a games user research group, what we do is we understand how to connect with people who want to choose to use the things that we are working on, which is very different than any other type of interactive technology approach that's happening out there. So we're not done yet. That's why I'm still here. I don't know if I'll last as long as he has, but that's why I, the community as well. That's why I love it. But let's take another question. Who's our runners? Runners, you can just choose. It's too much pressure to actually choose somebody.
This is a question for both of you guys, and thanks for the panels so far. So as this community has gotten more evolved and has developed some of its own methods, maybe your last point started to touch on this, but how has it become kind of its own thing? In what ways is games user research different and unique from more traditional user research? And what things could traditional user research learn from it?
I'll take a quick step. I mean, one of the things, you just look at the panel, or some of the talks from today, the motivation work is fantastic, fascinating. And that is being driven out of understanding games and play, right? So just replace the word of video games, computer games with play. And now you're talking about some fundamentally different things that we are tapping into and figuring out how to apply to today's technology, right? I haven't seen much actionable biometrics or actionable motivation research coming out of any other group. And it's because we start with play, we start with what's fun, and then we dig deeper, right? So there's a lot that we can still contribute. There's still a lot we're still figuring out as well. I mean, we're not, I don't think we've won by any means, but we're on our way.
Influence-wise, I think that productivity apps, websites, et cetera, have all been very interested in appeal as a concept, and a lot of that focus is, I suspect, spawned from the idea of doing research on games and entertainment.
Well, it's interesting. There used to be a time when choosing a career of games user research was a little bit nerve-wracking. Are we pigeonholing ourselves into something that it has no marketability outside of working at a games company? And I think you're going to see over the next 5 to 7 years that get turned upside down, where we become actually desirable, and the people will come and look for us here because you want apps to be just as enjoyable as anything else. You want your OS to be just as enjoyable as anything else. Why not? And who are the people that 100% are focused on that kind of thing? It's right here in this room. So there's a lot. There's a lot there. Let's take another. Yeah.
So you have UR and UX, and then out of that, you can look at specifically accessibility for the disabled. But a lot of game studios don't want to do that because they frankly don't have time, or they don't have the resources. So what needs to happen in order that the research departments of developers are able to take a good long look at accessibility and the needs of gamers with impairments and things of that nature?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of possible ways to try to spur that kind of innovation and that kind of research. I think one is to, have kudos and have sales come to developers who do pay attention to their entire audience and who invest in trying to give everyone an opportunity to play the game. And I think to the extent that the sort of the entire gaming world recognizes that, or that the media recognizes that, you have some more opportunities, more people pursuing it.
Let me. I'm going to try and be brief. I usually don't step on any type of Microsoft soapbox ever, but I will in this case. Wow. There's kind of a movement happening within the company around accessibility, around diversity and inclusion, for real. And I've been at the company for 15 years, and this is meaningful. One thing I will encourage everyone to look at is a recent Fast Company article on design at Microsoft, and kind of a shift in the perspective of the way that we are looking at accessibility. And accessibility is not a small part of the population we have to account for anymore. It's a shift that says you design for everyone and benefits will come to a broader audience. Everyone has some type of handicap, disability at some point or another. And if we understand what those things look like, we're not just helping a particular population, we're helping everyone. So you're going to see a lot more coming out at a Microsoft level from that perspective. Within the games and the Xbox world, again, it's taking a little bit of a different form, but there is investment that we're making, formal investment in trying to broaden the approach. Some of the things that are more directly under my control, and I have some of my teammates here who are part of this initiative, basic things like creating a better way to track the demographics information, physical information in our database of our participants. Because if we want to do research on different kinds of population, we have to know that they're there. So there's infrastructure things that we're putting into place now, asking a lot of different kinds of questions that go beyond your standard kind of demographics and things like that. So I'm glad you asked, but it's super important for us. So our time's up, but we didn't have much time to ask questions. Can we get one or two more questions? Are people cool with that? And then we can wrap up from there.
So you see a variety of areas in games innovating, and I wonder how games user research, like from your perspective, if you can comment on it, is innovating and what's driving it.
Sorry, what was in games innovating?
How games user research is innovating in itself, and what's driving it. If you can comment on it from your perspective.
What's driving innovation? Well, I think that in some ways it seems very easily driven, I guess, for me, because there are such a wide variety of problems to solve in games, and so the innovation is really driven by having this, new scenarios that become extremely important. We didn't talk about where we see the trends coming in research. It was one of the many questions we didn't get to, but one thing I'm really interested in is how do you test an open world game effectively? And it's driven by an extreme need to test open world games. So,
I think a lot of ways the research.
Too obvious, maybe.
There's going to be two directions, right? That we're going to be pulled in. One, innovation is going to come from kind of the game creator's need to do something different. The pressure within the hit-driven industry to always be doing something innovative. I mean, we have to be right there, right? So that's on one aspect, the product is going to drive, and the market is going to drive the need for innovation.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the other,
back to what you were saying before about but this is the one user research place where people don't have to choose your product.
Yeah.
They don't have to play your game.
Yeah.
So it has to be innovative.
The other source of innovation, which then puts us in the driver's seat, which is much more interesting, which goes to the point, the question you made of what kind of trends do we want to see, is what we internally kind of call a shift left kind of thing. I would love to see us driving innovation that tells our publishers and studios what games we make, not how do we make the games that they've decided to make. How do we polish a turd? I think we can get beyond that, and what kinds of predictive research can we do to be able to say, no, the game that you actually need to create fulfills a certain kind of need that may not be there in a portfolio, or taps into this other kind of scenario that no one really has tapped into yet, because we understand humans and we understand play, and wouldn't it be great if we could create a game that does X, Y, or Z? But anyway, shall we wrap this then, I think?
If there's no more, if we need to, then yes, okay. David
says we're out.
Okay, so I believe that there are buses out front now. They're out the atrium and to the right, if I understand properly. And we hope that everyone can come out to the social event this evening. If the bus will take you right there. If not, it is at Pedro's Cantina. On the badge. Bring the badge. Thank you. Other than that, thank you very much
Yes,
for
thank
listening
you
to
all.
us. I appreciate it.